Like, we don't have enough street drugs that you can't just use one of our street drugs.
I think you're spot on. I think late 80s, early 90s, they were doing that. They were making a lot of fake drugs in movies and stuff.
Yeah.
And the funny thing I think of when you say that isn't even a movie at all. It's a comic book.
Okay.
Because, like, late 80s, early 90s, there was this storyline in Batman where this drug Venom comes out. And it's basically like a steroid. And that's like where the character Bane comes from. It's like a spin-off from that. And like, I'm not aware of, in comics, before or since, that there's been this drug thing. But that was like a big underground thing in the Batman story where for a while Batman was hooked and he kicks it. And then one of his villains really gets into it. And so, yeah, that must have been like just a thing at the time that everybody thought was a cool storyline.
Do you think that was there a big fear of drugs at that point?
Well,
I mean, more so than maybe
this was the don't say or what was it? Don't say no, not
don't say no. Yeah.
Just say no.
Yeah, this is like at the tail end of the Nancy Reagan just say no and the DARE programs in high gear in the 80s.
Yeah, so this makes sense.
Yeah, they're probably coming off of that. I do think it's funny, like the Rollerboys they're pushing this drug, but they can't use it themselves, which I think is normal. I think that's a pretty common thing. But what I find interesting about that is I don't know how much we knew then, but we definitely know now that Corey was like totally an addict at this point in his life.
Really?
So he's like in this movie about making drugs, but don't get hooked on the drugs.
Yeah.
And he's off using like whenever the camera stops rolling.
Yeah. Was this like right during that time? I don't know. Like, was it?
Well, so I was skimming this while we were watching the movie, like you do, and this apparently it was something that he was on and off with for well over a decade, you know, and so he had these issues definitely during this movie, both before and after. At one point, he had to step away from making movies for a while because whatever he was on, like he swelled. He was normally around 150. He swelled up to over 300 pounds.
No
way!
And,
really?
Yeah.
I want to see pictures of him.
300 pounds.
So he was constantly, and I don't know, like I said, I don't know how public it was at the time, but apparently after the fact, everybody was like, yeah, we had to keep him away from it on set and whatever. So like, it wasn't like a secret at all.
Yeah. If he was doing that, I gotta say, he did a really good job acting in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, he was very good, I thought.
Yeah, I think he's great.
You're saying based on the fact that he was pretty high?
Yeah.
That if he was high the entire time?
Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Because he was not a very good actor in this movie.
Oh, really?
Wow.
I can't really peg whether it's the acting, but there are some lines where it's like, oh, really? You went there? Like, you actually said that? Could you have come up with it?
But that's a line. That's not him.
Yeah.
You can't be responsible for that.
Yeah.
But I always wonder if sometimes, it's okay writing, but the way the actors are delivering it just makes it sound terrible, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
but like in his case, he didn't have to be a good actor. Like, he's one of those actors where like you put him in a movie because he's a face. You don't put him in a movie because he carries a lot of weight with him, not the 300-pound weight, but like the gravity of the situation kind of way. I mean, like George Clooney, handsome and good actor.
Yeah.
But
especially in Killer Tomatoes.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, but if you got somebody who's good looking enough, they don't have to actually be good at acting.
Right.
Just being in the movie is enough.
Yeah.
And at this point in time, that was a Corey thing. I mean, we were joking that Devon Sawa was more handsome than Corey.
Yeah.
But
they look very similar.
But at this point, late 80s, Corey was a popular dude with the ladies. So
yeah. Going back to the comic book thing, Gav.
Yeah.
What'd you think of the fact that they were giving out
yeah.
What is it?
Rollerboy comic books.
Rollerboy comic books, yeah.
I loved it. I had some real questions about that, about like who was making them.
Yeah.
Like, 'cause somebody is drawing and printing these comics apparently, which I thought was weird. But I love the idea, because that had parallels to me with. Do you remember the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie?
Oh yeah,
and which is around the same time. That's probably like 1990, 91, somewhere in there too, where like they lure kids into the gang by having this underground area where it's like skateboarding and nonstop snacks and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, hey, we'll hang out here and then just go commit burglaries for us. So it's the same concept. Like, they're like, we're going to feed you comic books and whatever the slop was they were giving them out of the truck. And then you're going to think we're cool so we can recruit you.
Do you think maybe, like, back then, that this is like, you know, kind of like the satanic panic type thing where it was really exaggerated? Do you think that the, as far as like gangs back in the 80s, do you think this is what people kind of like, they didn't know what went on in these gangs and how they recruited people. So they just kind of like, do you think this was believable to people back then?
I think that probably, you know, it was a big panic back then because I think probably people were first getting really exposed to the concept of a gang.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of Hollywood's scary vision of what they created a gang is.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I don't think it's like super far off from how gangs work.
Mm-hmm.
I think the weird part is that in the movies, it's like suburban white kids.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, there probably are suburban white gangs, but generally speaking, I don't think those are the kids that are joining the gangs.
Yeah. I just never heard of gangs that like produce propaganda.
Yeah. I mean, maybe not in comic book form.
Yeah. But I mean, how else do you think they recruit? This is just like an extreme version of recruiting, I would say, you know?
I mean, they don't like produce propaganda, though. They just kind of lure people in by...
But I mean, think about it from the perspective of this gang. This gang... Like, I mean, do you remember the scene where he's like driving and he's like, we're investing in that power plant? Well, there's not a lot of modern gangs that are big enough that they're... You know, I shouldn't say big enough, but they're structured well enough that they can invest in bank or in power plants and stuff. So this was an extreme version of that. And that's why I find it funny that you said it's weird that they had the comic book. Like, who's making this comic book? Well, if they can invest in a power plant, they can definitely invest to hire somebody to create a comic book for them.
I get that. I just think it's weird because the cops are clearly trying to take these guys down, but they're operating so in the open. Like, they're not even, like, trying to not be a gang.
Yeah.
Like, they're not like, in the daytime, we're businessmen, but at night, we're a gang. No, we're just a gang. Like, it's a weird thing to me that they don't try to hide it at all. And as far as, like, the recruiting, like the propaganda, like, the comic book's a little over the top. But there's another point where the Gary Lee, the leader of the gang, is like talking to Griff, Ramrod, and you know, and he's like thinking about joining up, you know, fake joining up. And he's going and he's explaining it to him. He's like, society's falling apart. People are in the homeless camps. We provide family for people. And like, that's propaganda.
That is.
That's totally them being like, hey, we're going to be your brothers and sisters. Yeah, we're going to make you kill people. Yeah, but we'll be here for you.
And see that right there, what you're describing is how I assume gangs are.
Yeah. Yes, and like, that's
comic books
part
though. And like, I would love to see like a second issue Crip comic book. You know, like like where like the Crips are. You know, like I would just love that. You know, like if I wish that kind of thing actually existed. And you know, and can you imagine how much they'd be worth? You get your hands on like a first edition
Latin Kings comic.
book. The comic book thing, again, it's like, it's extreme. It's like kind of humorous, but like Eric knows this because he's got his Latin King podcast. I mean, like they've got their manifesto that they pass out to people, so they've got their own literature.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it's not a comic book, but But it does kind of get them like into the whole mindset and beliefs of why it's cool to be with them.
Maybe they would do better if they put it in a comic book form.
They might.
Get them all.
Kids like to look at pictures.
Young, man.
Kids like to look at young. Yeah, like show pictures of you, like sitting back with all that money and whatever.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah,
it's a good idea.
I'll have to pitch it to them.
The other thing